So, hey guys, thanks for checking out this episode of Practical EMS. I'm super excited to talk to Lori Hodges today. She's a paramedic and now emergency incident manager. Is that the right title for what you do now?
Emergency manager, yeah.
Emergency manager.
Yeah.
And how many years do you think you've been in EMS kind of combined with your paramedic experience and all that now?
As of 2025, it'll be 30 years.
Nice, very cool.
Yes.
Um, so she is the author of Shaking in the Forest, Finding Light in the Darkness, which has just been released, and I just finished reading it about a week ago. I think it has super important applicability to those of us that work in emergency medicine, and especially those in EMS. And I think it's super important for paramedics and EMTs to share their stories with the world, just so that we can all understand we're not in this alone. We all have similar struggles. We fight a lot of the same battles, and just learn strategies to thrive in a very difficult field. And I feel like your book was the epitome of that, like sharing stories, sharing how you overcame difficult things, and just give like tools and strategies to thrive in this field. And I think that's super important. And it's beautifully designed. I think one of my angles, you should be able to see it right here. And I'll include links to it and everything as well, so you guys can check it out. Um, and I love that your book centers around stories. The first one that stood out to me was how you found another victim of an ejection car accident in this dark forest off of a busy highway that we all know in Colorado. And it's at night. You guys pull up on this scene, and you guys, the fire department, I think, had kind of searched for victims. It was clear there was an ejection and presumably just one victim. And you were down there in the dark, kind of checking out this one victim, and you heard a sound that sounded like there was someone else there, even though this person shouldn't have been able to make a noise. Can you
Right.
kind of talk about that story a little bit?
Yeah, so we were actually coming into the call for an accident, and we were told that we could come in non-emergent because it was one patient dead on arrival. And so when we arrived there, I asked the firefighters if they had searched the forest because the forest just looked like a yard sale. When there's an ejection, it just throws
Mm,
everything out of the car. So whenever you have a call like that, you have to wonder if there's other people in the car. And they said, yeah, they searched the forest. So I was down with the patient, put him on a cardiac monitor. He looked like he was just sleeping in the forest. It was very eerie because he didn't seem to have a scratch on him. He was just lying there, kind of staring up at the forest. So I put him on the cardiac monitor. He was definitely dead. He was not coming back. But
mhm.
as I put him on the cardiac monitor, right behind me, I heard moaning. And so I turned around really quick to try to figure out, because we're in the forest, it could be an animal too. So
Yeah.
I turned around to figure out what's going on, and I couldn't see anything through the shadows. I asked everybody else if they had heard anything. They said no. Most of the firefighters were up on the embankment. My partner was coming down the embankment. And so I then looked again at the patient. And as I was staring at his face, I heard the moaning again. So I knew it wasn't coming from him. And I also knew that something was going on. And so my gut instinct really just told me that there was another person in the forest. So I had asked the firefighters and my partner, I said, search the forest again. I don't think that we're alone here. And so, not 10 feet away from us was another patient who was in the car. And he kind of like, he flew out of the car and he was kind of lodged between two trees. So it was very easy to miss him, especially with the darkness and all that. So, after that call, though, I just really, I considered how intuition plays a role in this field. Obviously, we all have kind of
Mhm.
that gut instinct, but also it was just a reminder that you have to be very wary of those scenes where, again, if it's a ejection or a yard sale, you have to be very wary of what you're doing and make sure that you're very meticulous about your searches.
Yeah, yeah, that's incredible. I think trusting your intuition as a paramedic is such a huge thing because you can't even put a finger on, necessarily this vibe you have on a scene, but when you know there's something amiss and you trust that, I mean, it led to finding another victim that would have been completely missed had you trusted other people. It's that kind of like trust but verify, I guess, kind of mentality. Like, because a lot of us would just assume, okay, they've been here, they've totally cleared it. We have one DOA and boom, we're out of here. But trusting your gut, I mean, that's an incredible story of like making sure that you trust yourself as you trust, the other responders on scene. It's incredible.
And also the other piece of that too was the gentleman that was between the two trees. He did not respond to any stimuli at all. He was not moaning in the forest. So that was the other thing that kind of caught me is what was it that I was hearing. I don't think it really came from him. I do think it was an intuitive thing. Somebody telling me that there's somebody in the forest there. So that was kind of one of the first times that something like that had happened to me as well.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, I think there's so many like weird, unexplainable things, like those of us that have been paramedics for a long time, like experience on scene that you can't really put a lot of words to, although you do a great job putting words to it in the book. But like, there's so many things that we like witness in EMS that there's no good explanation for. Like, I've had people on the podcast that talk about like seeing the spirit of a patient after they've died in the back of the ambulance. I think you talked about that, and like people reporting these out of body experiences when they're in cardiac arrest and like seeing their resuscitation. And one of the nurses I had on talked about this patient that was in full cardiac arrest. They took out her dentures to intubate her in one of the resus bays in the ER, and they put her dentures like in the crash cart. Just somebody just threw them in there, and you know, in all of the chaos. And they got this patient back, and she was up in the ICU asking where her dentures were, and then she was able to tell them, "I saw you guys put them in this red cart." And they're like, "What?" Like, you can't really explain that, right? But like, all of us have stories like that. It's just crazy.
Yeah, there's a lot of paramedics who have stories very similar, whether it's a spirit that they saw sitting next to them, or like you just said, a lot of patients are able to describe everybody that was in the room during the resuscitation, what happened, the conversations. Yeah, there's a lot of that.
Yeah, absolutely. How has witnessing the unexplainable changed kind of your worldview or your mindset regarding like resuscitations and things like that?
Well, I think that it allows me to be okay with the unknown. I am somebody who's naturally curious. So I believe in science, but I also believe that there's things that science hasn't been able to explain yet, and I'm okay with that. And it's just you know, you keep an open mind, and you seek out answers to stuff, and just keep trying to find kind of what makes sense to you. I do like to find answers to things. You know, I don't like not knowing, and I'm also a bit of a skeptic. So I'm not saying that I believe everything that's out there, every story people tell me, but
Sure.
it is that seek but verify kind of thing too, I guess, with this. But yeah, you do have to, once this happens enough to you, and I do talk about this in the book too, how over the years as a paramedic, I started to feel when somebody was going to die. And I knew before, when my shift would begin, I would know that that shift I would have somebody that's going to die. My body would start to feel it, and I'd get this very distinctive stomach ache with these butterflies. It would get worse throughout the day. And then as soon as the call would happen, that would go away. So when you have that happen enough to you, you have to kind of accept that something is happening that's beyond your ability to explain, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, when now as a PA in the ER and crews bring in a patient that they're very concerned about, to the point where they put the pads on them, right? Like they're like, this person is peri-arrest, even though maybe they look stable right now. If the crew has put the pads on them, I take them a little more serious. They've spent more time with this patient. I'm like, there's something that they're, you know, feeling that's not quite right with this person, that maybe looks totally stable, that they put the pads on them. So maybe I should take an extra second assessing this patient and make sure we're not missing something. Especially because they get a lot of really good pre-hospital. We get so much time with the patient, you know, in transport and on scene. In the ER, I'm with them for a much briefer period of time. And so I do rely on the crews still to like get a vibe for how has this patient looked for the last 45 minutes, as opposed to the 5-minute assessment that I'm going to do, you know?
Yeah, and we had, you know, I really respect that, because in some cases I've been on the receiving end of that skepticism of, why did you do these things? This patient isn't that bad. And then they figure it out later that there was a reason why I was really thinking that something's going to go wrong here. So it's good to have somebody who trusts that, hey, if they had a gut feeling about this, maybe we just need to take that extra step, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. We all have like these stories when we're new to EMS that are somewhat embarrassing. You shared a story that's kind of similar to experiences I've had when I was a brand new EMT, and how you talk about how you're rushing in with equipment and it's a critical patient, and you tripped over the threshold and equipment just flew everywhere. And a lot of my stories in EMS really revolve around me just looking like an idiot or not knowing something, especially when I'm a new EMT. I mean, the learning curve's so steep too. Like, you start out from EMT school, like really not knowing much of anything. You have no experience, and you rely on the paramedics on scene to kind of guide stuff. And so I think that's a very relatable story when we're new EMS.
And of
And
course, it always happens around a veteran paramedic who's like shakes
yeah,
their head like you're the stupidest person ever.
Right. um, but you make a great point about, you know, some of the rules in EMS, which is no running and no yelling, which is a rule I talk about all the time because we've got to be that calm in the chaos. And besides avoiding a trip and fall, why do you think this particular rule is so important in EMS?
So this is something that, you know, I learned early because I made mistakes, obviously, as a new rookie EMT, but also I've taken it into my work in disasters now that I'm a disaster worker, where what I've learned is that if I come into a scene, whatever it is, any kind of, it doesn't even have to be a patient scene. It could be just a stressful event with people. If I come into that and my adrenaline is going and my stress level is high, they're going to feel that and they're going to react to that. And so again and again, you know, you learn that. And then I'm a watcher. So I watched how other paramedics worked. And I noticed that the scenes that went the most smooth were when the paramedics took the time to really slow down before getting into the room or getting into the scene. And they take a deep breath and then they calmly, you know, they might joke a little bit or try to lighten the mood. And you could tell the tension in the room. You could actually feel it decrease. And so now when I work in an emergency operations center with like 100 people for a disaster, you know, it's even more important if I'm the leader or the EOC manager that I walk into that room confident and calm. And then everybody then looks at that and then they mirror that, you know. But if I don't do that, I can totally make everything go off the rails. So I think it's one of the most important lessons I learned as a paramedic.
100%. Yeah. I see that in the ER now too. Like it's so important for often it's the physician running, you know, the chaotic patient that just came in. And man, when they're amped and they're running around, acting super stressed, boy, that makes everybody else get way amped up and then mistakes are made and everyone's stressed out. Things are getting missed. And so that's one of the things I talk about in the ER too, is just no running, no yelling, no speed walking through the department. Like take a couple deep breaths, you know, because it's about kind of being mindful too. And if I'm running around with my hair on fire, I'm just not as much of a help to the patients as I could be. If I just slowly walk to their rooms, take a couple deep breaths on my way there, I can be part of the solution as opposed to being part of the chaos, which is already in abundance. You know, we don't need the providers that are supposed to be a calming presence adding to an already chaotic environment.
that's a great point.
And I do talk about how the best physicians that I met, the more serious the patient, the further they were from the patient, they would sit in a chair in the corner of the room. And I learned that too, that allowed them to not get tunnel vision on one specific thing. It also allowed them to kind of orchestrate the room, right? To make sure everybody was doing what they needed to do, but it gave them perspective. And that was something also that I learned, not just the slowing down, but also taking a step back and really looking at what's going on around you so that you don't get into some kind of a pitfall that can cause harm to you or your crew.
Yeah, absolutely. That's I think a key skill as being a paramedic, and probably even more so as an emergency manager, like, because you're not the one, you know, stuck doing a specific task. Like you're not, as a paramedic, like maybe you're doing an IV, but really you should be trying to delegate some of these tasks on chaotic scenes and trying to step back and look at the whole picture. And otherwise, you know, paramedics tend to focus in on one differential and they get stuck on that and they miss something else. And I think the more they get stuck doing these specific tasks, the less likely they are to see the whole picture. And I imagine that's probably 100-fold being an emergency manager. If you get stuck focused in on one thing, you can miss, you know, the forest for the trees.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it just helps you detach. I think we have to be detached in a lot of these scenes to kind of run it appropriately. There's a quote you have in the book, kind of in that same vein of detaching, that says there would be, I think, yeah, this is actually a quote you were just talking about. It says, there would be less chance of tunnel vision if I stepped back to see everything on the scene. I later noticed that our physician advisor would sit in a chair in the corner of the room whenever we brought in a serious patient, and the more serious the injuries or illness, the further away he sat, because he too wanted to ensure he could see everything going on in the room instead of getting too close and losing perspective. That's such a great illustration of the point you're making about detaching and being above the fray in order to properly manage a patient. I think that's beautifully worded.
Yeah, I had a hard time when I was a brand new paramedic, when I was going through kind of my clinicals. my mentor, they would not let me touch a patient because I had such a hard time of zoning in on the patient because I was an EMT for so long. So they made me stand at the door and I couldn't, nobody in the room would do anything until I directed them to do something. So she really taught me that I had to be the person who, I don't have to be the person doing patient care, but I had to know what needed to be done and be able to direct people. And that was more the paramedic's role than it was, an EMT's role.
Yeah. That might be one of the hardest things in transition from being an EMT to a paramedic. I don't think I probably even in all my clinicals in paramedic school, I think I probably didn't learn that until I'd actually been in practice for a little while, like realizing like I don't need to be the one setting up the nebulizer treatment and starting the IVs and hooking up the 12 lead. Like I need to step back and ask people to do that. Because usually on these scenes, there's plenty of people that are waiting to be asked to do something. And on the private, when you're on a private ambulance, I think it's even harder because you've got the fire department and they always get there first, at least in my system. They were there first 75% of the time. And so they were really good at like, you do this, you do that. And we kind of show up with our hands in our pockets. And if you're first on scene, it's kind of nerve wracking because you're like, all of a sudden I have to do this delegating, which I'm not that used to doing. That's a tricky skill for sure.
Yeah, it was a good lesson. I had a good teacher there.
Yeah, that's great. You worked at a detox center for a period of time and witnessed kind of firsthand the ill effects of addiction. And you talk about how sometimes helping is choosing not to help at all and setting up boundaries. And you're very open about your father's addiction and how you had to create boundaries with him to protect yourself in that relationship. And I think this is a very difficult but extremely important concept for people to know, especially in EMS, where we all have a desire to help and heal people, including our own family members. And it can be really difficult when it's a family member self-sabotaging their own health. What advice do you have for people that are in a similar situation to that, where a family member's got these self-destructive habits?
Well, the first thing is to seek others who are in a similar situation, seek some help and some guidance there because especially in this field, we are helpers. It's natural to us to want to try to solve the problem too. And in some cases, the problem needs to be solved by that individual working through what they need to work through. You want to give them the support that they need, but not enable them to continue that behavior. And then in my dad's case, he was a master manipulator, so it became harmful to my health to be in that environment. And so I had to cut that off completely in order to kind of save myself and make sure that he has ownership of what he's going through and he is going to take the steps he needs to take. And, addiction's very hard. The good thing about working at that detox center is it helped me to understand my father better, but it also helped me to understand that I can't do everything for him and that I can take a step back and it's okay. But that's a hard thing, I think, for most people, especially if it's your family too. It's a very difficult thing to not help when you know somebody is struggling. So there's this balance, but I think that's why it's important to talk to somebody, whether it's a therapist one-on-one that you talk to or a group of people that are going through the exact same thing, like Al-Anon or something like that, right? Of people who have family members who've gone through it and they can provide some kind of guidance for you. Because every situation is unique. I can't say don't help in this situation because who knows what they're going through, right?
Yeah, no, that's great advice. I mean, that's such a hard thing to do, to set boundaries, and it goes against your gut instinct, but ultimately, people have to want to change, and it's got to be them that kind of initiates the change. And as much as we might want to force people on a healthier path, we just can't every time. And eventually it does affect your own mental health, and that's not worth sacrificing. That's a great point. You also bring up a great point about our perspectives on other people, especially like coworkers in EMS that we spend a ton of time with, and a ton of downtime with. If you're working with a fire department interface or on the fire department, we may not truly know what all their struggles are, even with spending a lot of time with them. And even in my own career, I've seen coworkers that seem like they have it all together. They're phenomenal paramedics, but they're actually really struggling with their own demons outside of work, and you just aren't privy to it. How should this change how we view people and those we spend a lot of time with, especially coworkers in emergency medicine?
Well, the first thing is that, we don't know everything that people are going through. We're only going to see a side that they allow us to see. So to have a little bit of grace with people and to not take things personally is one big thing. So, I had this grouchy paramedic I worked with all the time, and he was always just so gruff with me, and he would yell at me over nothing. And, when I was young, I took that very personally. Like, he hated me and he didn't want me to be an EMT. And none of that's really true. It's just that was his personality. It's how he communicated. But without me kind of taking the time to and I'm not saying that it's okay that somebody just yells at you all the time either, but without knowing kind of more about him and more about his history and who he is, I wouldn't see the full picture. And he is the person on our ambulance service who got the most letters from patients saying how much he had helped them, right? So he had this whole side of him that was this compassionate, loving person who was very helpful with patients, excellent at his job. But sometimes he did come off really, gruff. I could have just focused on that negative side of him and always despised him because of it without ever seeing the beautiful side of him, which was, he would come out of nowhere and give me an ice cream cone, or he would throw a party for somebody just because, I don't know, they got a new job or something. I don't know. But he would just do like these random acts of kindness out of nowhere. And he had just this gentle soul. But I could have just focused on the fact that he was this curmudgeon,
Yeah, I think that's huge. I mean, I think every brand new EMT or even paramedic I talk to has that partner. I think it's a somewhat prevalent thing in EMS. You get these super gruff partners, and they've probably seen it all and done it all, and they get a brand new EMT or paramedic that's a little more gung-ho, and they treat them a little bit less than ideal. And I think we've all had those partners too. So I think that's a really good perspective to have, to like see there's multiple sides to some people, and like maybe this isn't who they actually are. Maybe they actually are a kind-hearted person. They don't know how to come across that way.
They don't know
or they're
how
a bad communicator.
Yeah, exactly.
Or maybe they are, the other side of this too is people might be going through very difficult things in their life and you don't know, and then they snap at you for some reason while you're at work, and it really has nothing to do with you at all. And if you don't have the grace to take a minute and say, is this really about me? Or is this maybe something else going on? And you give them that so that it doesn't become a bigger issue that now they're dealing with one more thing on top of everything else that they're dealing with. I think that that's also very important.
Yeah, and like you said, like don't take it personally for that reason. I think that's our gut instinct, like immediately, is to take things personally, and it's much more about them and probably what they're going through than anything to do with you. I think that's a great point. Like when I was a paramedic and we would bring patients in and maybe we didn't start an IV on them because we didn't think they needed it, or we couldn't get the IV or whatever, and the nurse is like, does the patient have an IV? And as a paramedic or EMT, you're like, no, they don't have an IV. We were just down the street, or they're a really hard stick. We're bumping up and down the road. And the nurse is like, no, I just need to know so we can get one going. I'm not accusing you of not doing your job, but I feel like kind of in EMS, maybe that's our gut instinct, is to jump to like taking it personal when that's just not the case most of the time.
Yeah. Are you questioning my decisions? Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe that's because we do get questioned a lot. I mean, when I was a paramedic, you get the physicians in handoff that are questioning your decisions. And maybe it's just we're so used to it that we just jump to being defensive immediately when maybe they're just asking a genuine question.
Right. Exactly.
Another good quote in your book is, while paramedicine showed me the dark side of human nature at times, it also showed me the light. Disasters start with a horrible act, but always end with the absolute best of humanity. In the difficult work of emergency response and emergency management, the lesson here is to see beyond the challenge or the call in front of you. Look for the beauty that comes after that call. Look for the good in the bad. It is always there. I just think that is beautifully articulated. We deal with the worst things that humans do to each other, but we also get to see the amazing things we do to help others in need. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that our world is very concentrated on the negative. And in our field, in emergency services and emergency management, we are with people on their worst day. So it's very easy. And I think this is especially true for law enforcement. It's very easy to only see the bad because that's what is in front of you every day. However, if you really just focus on that negative or that bad call or what happened that went awry, you're missing out on all of the different signs and all of the different people that were involved that maybe because of that incident came together, did something beautiful. And if we as a field can shift more to focusing in every day on what's the beauty and tragedy, then I think it does help with mental health. It helps knowing why you're in this business to begin with. So for example, after every disaster, you see communities come together, strangers come together and help one another. The Cajun Navy came out of that, right? It was just neighbors helping neighbors, and now they're an organization that helps throughout all of the South whenever there's flooding. And then, for me, it's I just think that, like I mentioned in the book, that I had a terminally ill cancer patient, and I was taking her to Denver. So it was a 2-hour transport. I knew that it was her last ambulance ride. She knew that she had a day or two left. All she wanted was to be able to see her kids one last time. And so she didn't want any pain medicines. She wanted to be very clear when she saw her kids. And so that call really stuck with me for a very long time, not because of the sadness of the fact that that was her last couple of days, but because we had this excellent conversation about her kids and how much beauty she had in her life and how happy she was about everything that had happened, and that she could actually get to the hospital one last time and see them. And I chose, I think, to just see the beauty in that, and to see that I was able to give her that, which was awesome. And that's also why we're in this business, right? Because that's how we help. It might not be helping by giving the medicines and doing an IV. It could just be the person who sits there and talks to you for a little bit and makes your day just a little bit better,
Absolutely. I mean, that's a phenomenal point that I think a lot of people I've had on touch on. It's that, like, the patients don't care about all these high level skills that we really care about as paramedics. Like, we want to do the intubations and the cardioversions and all these cool procedures that we have in our tool belt. But the patients just care about that meaningful interaction with you, and were you nice to them? Like, that's what they actually care about. And I think too often paramedics get burned out by focusing on, they look at their last month and they're like, how many times did I intubate? How many times did I do this task or that task that I was trained to do? And they don't take those intentional moments to remember meaningful moments they've had with patients. And that's really what we all got into it for initially. And I think sometimes we lose sight of that, but I think that will actually combat burnout, is if you can remember those times. I mean, that call was how many years ago, and you're still talking about how meaningful it was. And I think that helps you actually thrive in this field, as opposed to just focusing on, I didn't, this patient didn't get cardioverted or intubated. Like, what a waste of my skills just transporting him to Denver,
Right. Well, I was recently at a conference. It was an emergency management conference. And a bunch of the keynote speakers, the whole first day was really negative. It was about burnout and how this is a very tough field, and how COVID really created this strain on our field. I would think the same for emergency services, but all day I was just hearing about how bad everything is, and how it's causing this burnout, and how people are leaving the field and they don't want that. But they didn't talk at all about kind of the good parts of the field. And I'm like, yeah, if all you ever talk about is the bad and the burnout, people are probably going to be like, yeah, maybe it is time to check out here. So I got up, we do these like COEM talks, they're like TED Talks. And so I got up and did a 7-minute on the things I find that are beautiful in disaster. And one of those is, my favorite thing in the world is a sunset during a wildfire. And I always, whenever there's a wildfire, I always take the time to stop and look at that sunset, because you don't get it anywhere else unless there's a fire, because it's smoke that causes it. But it's a different perspective, right? So yeah, something terrible is happening nearby, but only because of that terrible thing do you get this beauty that's just amazing that you're never going to see again, right? So I just wanted people to take a step back and say, yeah, everything that everybody's saying is true. But you also have to look at the other side of it, is why did you get in the business in the first place? And what are those things that you're doing that maybe you're taking for granted a little bit,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it was actually easier to do when I was an EMT, because there wasn't all these like crazy skills I was super focused on, but like,
as much pressure.
Yeah, exactly. And just transferring a patient from one hospital to another, I would just sit there, instead of sitting behind them in the jump seat and typing my report, I would sit on the bench seat next to them and actually have a conversation with them. And I can recall those patients with way more clarity than I can some of the patients that I've intubated or cardioverted. I was like, these ones I actually had a meaningful conversation with stand out in my mind more so when I was an EMT and didn't have all these other things to focus on or think about. I think that's a great point. And the wildfire thing too, I'm in Colorado, and we've had a few really bad fires here in the last decade. And I was a paramedic student at the time, working a wheelchair van shift. But I actually jumped on the wheelchair van because we went to evacuate this nursing home, and the fire was coming over kind of one of our front range mountains, and you could see the flames from, I mean, miles away, because the mountains are, you know, pretty obvious. And seeing that sunset was like incredible, but you're like, there's like this fear in the back of your mind, like our city is actually burning, like this fire is close to houses and they do not have it contained, but there's this like horrible beauty at the same time.
But
That's a good way to describe it. Horrible beauty.
Yeah, I think that's an important, and that's kind of like, I mean, that's like any of these calls or these horrible situations we run on. You know, there's so much death and horrible things that humans do to each other, but if you can see the helping hands around them and how communities pull together, it's the same thing. It's kind of the horrible beauty that comes from these disasters. I think that's a really good point you made.